Our episode begins with Celebrimbor being let out of his room by one of Galadriel's guards. We can see that he's rather annoyed at this and demands to know why the High King saw fit to keep him under house arrest for over a week. The guard apologizes for the delay and explains that the High King has been calming the city and disentangling all the problems Elendil and the Smiths have created. Celebrimbor's look of anger fades and he bows his head. Have we really caused so many ills? How is this even possible? How could an envoy from Valinor itself err on so many grave points? That is a question we have been asking as well, but the High King has stated that all shall be answered today, and he has specifically requested the attendance of your guild. We next see a gathering crowd in the main courtyard of the city, where Gil-galad is standing before the people on a slightly raised platform. It is clear that the crowds before him are in a state of confusion. The Smiths, with Celebrimbor as their head, are standing behind him to his right, while Galadriel, Celeborn, Celebrian, and Elrond stand to his left. My fellow elves, Gil-galad begins. As you are all aware, there has been an elf here claiming to be an envoy from Valinor. His message was of the fating of the world, of the corruption, so heavily seeped into the very heart of Arda itself, that if we did not act without delay, and without prudence, we would all be destroyed. I tell you now that this elf was a liar and a fraud. I will tell you first how I came to know him to be a liar. When this Elendil came to Mithlond almost 10 months ago, he used the great tree of Linden as his example, for even it was decaying, despite being the heart of a land so long blessed by the presence of the High Elves. In my foolishness, I considered this to be the only proof necessary to trust the words of the envoy. I was perplexed, then, that the decay should come so quickly, and go so unnoticed until it was pointed out. It was then that my suspicions of this envoy began to kindle, and grew ever greater as I noticed that the tree seemed to stabilize and recover, the green returning to its leaves and the rich life of its roots continuing to expand. I therefore launched my own investigation into this corruption. I examined the forests of the world, the animals, and the lives of the men and elves who lived within Linden and the surrounding lands. I can say now, with certainty, that there is a fading within this world, one which, in the end, will destroy all that we love in Middle-earth. At first glance, this would appear to justify rather than refute the words of the envoy, but this too would be foolishness. For the essential difference of the envoy's message, which distinguished his words from the discoveries which we ourselves had been making, was of the imminence of this destruction, the quickness of this fading, not the mere fact of fading itself. To my estimations, however, the true devastation implied by this Elendil would not come to pass for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. Still, I thought, he was a messenger of the Valar. Manwë has far higher thought, and Mandos greater foresight than I. But the example of the great tree stood ever in my mind, and when I returned, I found that it had healed completely. No, something was amiss. I sent a message to Galadriel and Celeborn, warning them of the envoy and explaining all that I had learned, and I made plans to ride here as soon as I could. Then, while I was making my way here, one of the eagles of Manwë came to me. He regretted to inform me that their envoy had become lost by tricks of the enemy, and had gone far to the south by mistake. When I heard this, I felt a dread like no other set upon me. I said to the messenger that we had thought the envoy had come almost a year prior, and he became overwhelmed with concern, and asked me to describe this Elendil. When I did, the eagle proclaimed that this was not their envoy but an impostor. I therefore rushed to the city with all haste, hoping both that the lord and lady had received my message and that I would not be too late to quell whatever devilry the false messenger had brewed. He pauses and turns to the Smiths. It seems that I was almost too late. The Smiths accept the rebuke reluctantly, with the exception of Celebrimbor, who looks devastated by the news. He immediately goes over to Galadriel and reconciles with her, kneeling before her and repenting of his actions. Galadriel raises him to his feet and embraces him, noting that she truly believes that from now on he shall see through such deceptions. Once he is done speaking, we see Gil-galad collect Elrond and retreat into the palace. At first, everything seems to be reconciled, with the Smiths each apologizing to Galadriel and Celeborn in turn, and the people of Ostendethil relieved to find a resolution to the rebellion. As they are apologizing, however, Galadriel notices that many of the Smiths still bear suspicion in their hearts. They eye her and Celeborn, as if waiting to hear what terms and conditions they will soon voice to the High King. Galadriel looks at them and her face begins to sadden. She turns to the side to speak to Celeborn quietly. Unfortunately, it appears that not even the High King can remove all stain of lies from the hearts of elves. What do you mean, my love? Whether by our fault or not, the trust between us and the Smiths has been broken. Celeborn looks at his wife curiously. Are you sure of this? Celebrimbor seemed genuine in his... My love, Galadriel interjects. Look at them. Their respect for the High King has shocked them out of their foolishness, but one does not go from months of suspicion and hatred to acceptance and loyalty after a morning rebuke. She turns back to the Smiths. I fear that they shall continue to be suspicious of our every word and action for years to come. It is still there in their eyes, though now buried under a layer of clarity. She pauses as her back straightens, and she seems to come to a realization. There's something more about this Elendil. She storms off, and Celeborn, confused, runs after her. In our next scene, we see the orcs gathering around a pedestal with an altar in the center, and the council of men and elves we saw several episodes ago standing around it. On top of the altar is tied a woman, likely taken in the siege or in another raid. She's struggling and attempting to free herself and to cry out through her bonds, which avails her nothing other than the amusement of the orcs. Adar approaches her with unusual solemnity, clothed in a dark gray cloak and holding within his hands a jet-black sheath. He hands the sheath to an elf wearing a bizarre, distorted mask. We see a shot of the woman looking up in utter terror, and then another with an elf pulling a black sword from the sheath, raising it into the air, and stabbing down towards the altar. At first, everything is still. Soon, however, a rumbling begins to grow throughout the land. The earth quakes, and what few trees are left are eradicated as the ground begins to crack all the way to a large mountain at the center of the land. As soon as the crack arrives, there's an explosive eruption, with gas and smoke venting out of the top, and we see in a shot at Adar that he is filled with both hope and fear at the sight. The council members begin to smile at the erupting mountain, only to have their enjoyment cut off. For the volcano almost immediately begins to slow down and once more becomes dormant after a minute or so. When all is quiet again, the orcs raise an uproar, and the council turns to Adar. I thought you said that this would work, one of the men says. Adar steps closer to the body of the woman. Clearly, she was not of great enough power. We are going to need someone of nobler lineage. Indeed, that is why I had requested that an elf be captured rather than some middling human. One of the elves turns to Adar and says, You have berated many others on this council for anything not befitting our master's great plan. Now that you have failed in your task, you still wish to shift the blame to others. Perhaps we should join Khamu in reminding you that you are not our master, and we ought to put you to judgment just as you have done for others. Adar frowns at the suggestion, but still no fear appears in his eyes. He says nothing and lets the silence hang for a few moments. He then slowly approaches the elf, who begins to grow more worried with each step. Are you meaning to imply that you would have succeeded against an ambush of Númenóreans? If so, that is certainly a remarkable feat, and I would gladly accept your offer to go fetch someone of noble blood to be used in our next sacrifice. I do not believe that was the task I was assigned. Ah, good. So you will leave me to the true task, and keep the quibbling to yourself. Adar smiles. Well, my friends, thankfully for you all, you shall not have to wait for too long. We immediately cut to Adar and a group of orcs walking into a prison chamber, although internally it doesn't appear to be much of a prison. It has stone walls and a locked door, but also windows, a set of comfortable-looking beds, and 3 men playing a game on the floor. They notice Adar as he walks into the room and immediately begin to look uncomfortable as they stand. My lord, one of them says, why have you come here? Have we failed in some way? Another continues. Adar smiles slightly for a moment before saying, What makes you think that you have failed? Well, my lord, when you came in, it was with a look of expectation, and we were under the impression that we had completed all of our... Adar interrupts. You actually thought that one mission would mean freedom and security for the rest of your days. The 3 men look to the floor and brace for some rebuke which does not come. Adar lets the silence hang. Make no mistake. You will be spared and even kept from slavery, as promised. But only insofar as you persevere in your willingness to serve. The men look at each other, and Adar waits until they have finished processing what this means before continuing. I need a man of noble birth. One of the elves or Númenóreans should work fine, but he must be alive and ideally unharmed by the time he arrives here. I will assist you in getting back to the fortress unseen, and I will help you get out, but I will not do anything else. Do you all understand? Yes, my lord. Though, what is a Númenorian again? One of the men says, while the other two raise their eyebrows at him. Adar shakes his head. Ah, yes, forgive me. I had forgotten your simple upbringing. He turns to the other two. You both are familiar with the term, are you not? They nod. Good. Very well, then. I wish you three and your companions luck. You will leave tonight, and I expect the kidnapping to be completed by the end of the month. He moves to leave the room before saying, Oh, and please do remember what I've already demonstrated to you all. For your own good, of course. He exits. We then go back to Ost-in-Ethil, where we see Celebrimbor looking at the remaining rings with a troubled expression. There are several smiths around who do not yet seem aware of what has happened, until one of them eventually asks him what is the matter. He shakes his head and merely points to the pedestals with the missing rings. The smiths quickly realize what this means. Someone has stolen them. Yes, but who? Another elf says. We must find them. Celebrimbor is silent as they continue to squabble over theories among themselves. Eventually he speaks. I do not think Elendil has taken the rings. He turns around and sees a certain thinly suppressed suspicion in their eyes. Celebrimbor recognizes this almost immediately. No, I don't think Galadriel or Celeborn had any part in it either. If Elendil wanted the rings, I see no reason he would not have taken them all, or what use he would have had with only 2 of them. As he is speaking, Narvi bursts through the doors of the guild. Celebrimbor! The smiths all turn to the dwarf, and Celebrimbor steps forward with a confused look on his face. Narvi runs up to him. I have bad news, and I'm afraid I must speak to you alone. Right now? Celebrimbor asks. Immediately, Narvi says with an urgent glance at the other smiths. Celebrimbor looks around and they nod to him, each packing his things and leaving with relative haste. When they are alone, Celebrimbor looks as though he is about to say something, but Narvi cuts in before him. I stole one of the rings. It takes Celebrimbor several seconds to process the words. What? Why? How? When would you have done this? Narvi nods, as if this were the reaction he expected. My father was angered by how secretive you and the rest of the smiths were, and commanded me to find the project you had worked on and bring it to him. Then, with even more pain on his face, I snuck in through our secret entrance while the city was in a riot. Though I didn't know the riot was going on. Celebrimbor says nothing. From his face, we can see that he is barely able to contain his hurt from being betrayed, his anger at losing one of the rings, and his fear about what this might cause. He stares at Narvi for a while. The dwarf simply maintains a bowed head and sorrowful expression, seemingly willing to accept whatever is coming. Eventually, Celebrimbor closes his eyes and his face softens, but not to a state of acceptance. I presume you have a reason for telling me this. Narvi looks up. Well, yes. My father has begun to act oddly. He's less free with his riches and more suspicious of others, and after a week of having to hear him judge oddly with the dwarves, I think it might be the ring I've given him that has caused all of this. He's never parted with it, as if it were the single largest chunk of mithril ever mined. Celebrimbor's eyes narrow, though not at Narvi. That could be a problem. He looks at the other rings. Celebrimbor, Narvi continues. I know it's not proper to ask for a favor from one whom I have just betrayed, but I need you to help me get the ring away from my father. Why are you not able to do it yourself? I've tried, but he refuses to listen to me. My only hope now is that he will listen to the master of the craft he bears, for if he does not, we would have to take it by force. Celebrimbor seems to think for a few moments before nodding. He smiles his first warm smile on the scene and adds, I suppose this is one way to return what you stole as well. In our next scene, we are watching Glorfindel travel with a group of entwives. If you want, we can even have a map sequence like the ones in the show to demonstrate just how far the entwives have taken them to the west. He should be about halfway between the Anduin and where the borders of Fangorn now stand, placing him in the middle of the wold. Of course, being the Second Age and the men of the area only recently having begun deforesting the land, he and the entwives who are with him should be in a fairly dense forest of a similar look to Fangorn, though slightly younger than what we see in Lord of the Rings. Glorfindel is listening to the songs of the entwives, and even humming along as he walks beside them, somehow tirelessly keeping pace despite his shorter legs. Occasionally, the look of peace he has from the songs breaks, and he peers behind himself, though no noise or any hint of them being followed shows itself to the audience. Eventually, one of the entwives notices this and says to him, My dear, you must stop worrying about those poor men and halflings. Have you yourself not noted that your mission to the west is so much more important? In truth, Great One, Glorfindel says, I am not overly concerned with their safety anymore. I believe I was the one being pursued by this warlord in the first place. Ah, the entwife says, half surprised. You fear they shall soon come after you. It is one of the thoughts on my mind, indeed. The entwife pauses for a few seconds before continuing. I do not think you should fear them any more. We are now deep within the great forests where the husbands guard all living things, exactly as they stand. Indeed, I should not doubt if the trees you see around you are still alive from the elder days, and the whole forest, despite its disordered state, is likely being watched most closely by our kinsmen. Glorfindel looks at the entwife with a questioning glance. You seem to begrudge the Entish method of guarding the forest. At first, the entwife does not respond, though it's unclear if this is due to mere Entish thoughtfulness, or that she is taken aback by the comment. I would not say that I begrudge our kinsmen. It is only that their care of nature is so crude and disorganized. You saw our gardens, did you not? You no doubt noticed how wonderfully arranged each of the trees, bushes, and flowers were, how well kept they were from the smallest detail to the gardens as a whole. Whereas this forest... She pauses again and looks about her with mild distaste, though certainly not disgust. There are certain trees scattered about without any sense of order, weeds growing and choking out some of the most beautiful flowers, all the more disheartening since the husbands do not leave a space for them to grow. Glorfindel considers all this thoughtfully when, suddenly, he hears a snarl from behind him. He turns about in alarm and readies himself for an attack. The entwife once more turns to him. What is it, dear? I'm afraid that they are pursuing me, and if we do not part ways for a time, you would certainly be caught up in the fight. We have promised to be your guide, and we will continue to do so until you have found your way. The other entwives nod at this. The 6 of them move into a fairly defensible position with their backs towards a stepped hill, not unlike the one that we read about in Lord of the Rings, the one that Merry and Pippin climb up when they first enter Fangorn, though obviously not the same one, considering how much further east this is. They begin to hear various noises, mostly snarling, but there are also the sounds of steel on steel. These sounds grow closer and closer until we hear the sound of a young girl screaming. Glorfindel immediately recognizes the voice and charges into the trees. In our next scene, we see Narvi and Celebrimbor entering Moria. Narvi is still embarrassed by his actions and forces all the dwarves around him to be extra courteous to Celebrimbor as they pass through. Eventually, Celebrimbor grows tired of this and stops the two of them. My friend, he says, I understand that this is your way of apologizing, but flattery is just as common in courtesy as gratitude or loyalty. Narvi turns away at the rebuke, but nods. You're right. I suppose this is the natural reaction of a dwarf who has offended a friend. I must remind myself that you are no dwarf. Celebrimbor smiles at this. Have I really made it so confusing? Now Narvi smiles. You have indeed. You have a nearly dwarvish obsession with crafts, and a mind for metal the likes of which I have never seen in an elf before, even among your fellow smiths. Although, he pauses. Yes? Celebrimbor urges him to continue. Well, you do have something that is particularly undwarvish about you, though I'm not sure if this is because you are an elf or because you are yourself. As he says this, they approach the royal hall of Dwardelf, and Narvi leads Celebrimbor in to see King Durin. There they find King Durin giving judgments over a group of families about some dispute over newly discovered diamonds. Durin then resolves the dispute by assuming the diamonds for himself, reasoning that this is the most efficient way to prevent any bloodshed. I will not have any of Durin's folk kill each other over jewels, he announces. Narvi and Celebrimbor look at each other with a questioning glance, but still, they present themselves to the king when their time arrives. My son, Durin exclaims in surprise upon recognizing Celebrimbor. Why have you brought the elf to me? King Durin, Celebrimbor says, bowing before him. Do not fear. I hold no grudge towards you. I see now that we were deceived by a false envoy, and that we should have maintained more open relations with you about all of our projects. Still, I am afraid that I must ask you to return the ring that you have taken from us. These are objects of great power, as I'm sure you now realize, having wielded it for yourself, and we have discovered that they are likely perilous to those who wield them. Celebrimbor remains bowed for several moments before looking up at the king again to see why he has not responded. Celebrimbor is confused to see that the king does not appear to be thinking or ignoring Celebrimbor, but merely sitting there. He turns back to Narvi, on whose face is written the anxiety of your fear coming to pass. He therefore, not knowing what else to do, begins to repeat his request. King Durin. No, Durin says, interrupting. I will not relinquish my ring to you. Instead, I will keep it as a guarantee of your cooperation, a memorial of what happens when you do not pay proper respect to the dwarves. Celebrimbor frowns, but stands up, bows, and goes away with Narvi. What now? Celebrimbor says. I was hoping you would have an idea for that. Celebrimbor looks at Narvi curiously. What makes you think that I would know what to do in this situation? Our only options for retrieving the ring are asking for it or taking it by force. He looks at one of the dwarvish guards, and I do not think the latter would be wise. Very well, let us report this to your High King. We have seldom met, but even to me his wisdom has been well shown. We then see the 3 spies, which we saw earlier, re-entering the Eminarn fortress along with a scouting company. We see that they specifically avoid the elves, but go quickly to their co-conspirators and explain the plan. One of them explains the mission and the general plan. Another explains their thoughts on the method of execution. While they're in this conversation, they begin to question whether what they've done is a good thing, and one of them even suggests turning themselves in. We are in the middle of the fortress right now. The orcs can't get at us, and a new alliance was just sealed between us and the seamen. This is the best chance we have to put this behind us and be free of the orcs. Yarin, one of the spies says, we opened the gates during a battle. It turns out that they were going to win. You were the one who told the orcs who Lord Gath would value most, and several of us led the orcs to the armory. Do you really think they'll forgive us after all that? Besides, you've seen just how powerful the orcs are. They've been massing more and more with each passing day, and many of the kingdoms in the east are forging alliances with them. Even if the Númenóreans do help us, what can they do against so many? Another spy nods. You saw that army the orcs used to siege the fortress? That was only a tiny portion of their force, no bigger than a fingernail as to the rest of the body. Sure, they didn't take the fortress this time, but what would happen if they sent out their entire army? We'd be done for. Yarin shakes his head. Oh, all right, he sighs. Let's just get this over with. One of the spies who had remained in the fortress goes about dressed as a guard, showing that he has deeply ingratiated himself to the Númenóreans in the time since the battle. He approaches the chamber of the Númenóreans and finds Minister there reading a scroll. My Lord Minister, the spy says, if I am not mistaken, you were curious about the method of the orcs leaving the fortress, were you not? I was, Minister says, standing up. Have you discovered anything? Yes, in fact, I believe I may have found the passage. Then we must investigate at once, Minister exclaims. He calls over 3 of his guards, and the 4 of them follow the spy out of the building and towards the northeastern portion of the citadel. I have assembled a few of my fellow guardsmen to assist with the investigation, my lord. They are currently working on finding a way to get into the passage. Have you not found a way in? One of Minister's guards says. No, there appear to be numerous locks put in place. Fascinating, Minister says. In either case, I was hoping that they would be able to get to the inside by the time I was able to get you over here. Ah, here we are. They approach a section of the wall with what now appears to be an indication. Have you found a way in? Yes, we just closed the door again when you came in over the hill, one of the spies says. Then, with a weird system of knocks, the door begins to open. So, there seems to be some form of code attached to the door, Minister ponders. I wonder who would have built this sort of structure into the mountains. Did not Lord Arondir speak of the Dark Civilization? One of the guards says. Minister frowns. Let us not talk about that for now. Would you like to explore further, my lord? The spy says as he looks down the hallway. There may be orcs left, but since it's been so long since the battle, they should either be gone or dead by now, don't you think? Yes, let's go investigate, Minister says. He enters the tunnel. His guards follow, and the spies come in last. As they enter, one of the spies falls back and grabs one of his companions. Where's Yarin? He whispers. His companion's eyes dart towards the Númenóreans, and he quickly shakes his head, as if to say they shouldn't be talking about it with them around. He must have gotten lost. The original spy frowns but nods, and they continue to move down the hallway. In our next scene, we see Galadriel enter into the tower in which Varc and his people have been staying. She is flanked by 2 guards, with Celeborn noticeably absent as they practically sneak into the main hallway. She leads her guards silently towards Varric's room, which is guarded by someone. My lady, the guard says. Step aside, I have urgent business with the king. My lord has forbidden anyone from entering, even his closest advisors. While I'm sure you mean no harm, I simply cannot let you pass. Nonsense. Not only do I mean him no harm, I have reason to believe that he has been harmed already, and I am here to save him from his wound. The guard looks at her suspiciously. I don't believe I saw any wounds on his flesh when he came in. Galadriel shakes her head. It is just like a man to assume that because one's body is whole, he has not suffered any injury. As she says this, she strikes at the guard with a flash of movement and disarms and restrains him. One of her guards moves to take him. Make sure that he is unharmed, Galadriel says as he is taken away. She then turns and barges into the door. She finds, however, that no one is inside. She squints with suspicion and notices a trap door in the corner of the room. Just as she is about to go in, however, Celeborn comes into the room. I would have thought, he begins, that one so furious at Elendil's intrusion into the space of our friends would have been more hesitant to imprison a guard. Galadriel turns to her husband. Is not cutting someone open considered to be either murder or medicine, based on whether it intends to kill or to heal? Regardless of whether I am successful, I fully intend to help Varix. Celeborn shakes his head. Help him with what, exactly? My love, this Elendil seems to corrupt everything he touches. Did you not notice the change that had taken place amongst the men who live here after the envoy's visit? Even if he merely spoke, I do not doubt that the words of this wicked sorcerer are enough to cast a spell of darkness upon this house. Celeborn sighs, but nods to his wife. Very well. Let us proceed. The three of them venture down into the trapdoor and find another chamber full of books, various medical tools, and a great number of dead, sterilized bodies, both of men and orcs. There's a stone table in the center of the room covered with dried liquids of various colors. The atmosphere of the room makes one feel as though they have left reality and entered into a nightmare. And sitting in the middle of it all at a desk is Varix, clearly hard at work studying something and wearing a ring on his finger. I thought I told you that I wasn't to be disturbed, Varix says in his native language. You certainly have taken full advantage of the privacy I granted you, Galadriel replies in Sindarin, though it's unclear whether she is simply saying this or replying to his words with understanding. In either case, Varix's back straightens and he turns around, shocked and horrified to see Galadriel and Celeborn standing there. He looks over at the blood-soaked table and the dead bodies and then looks back at them. Would you like to explain all of this? Galadriel asks. Varix's face hardens, and he stands to face his guests, brandishing the ring on his finger. Very well. Which would you like me to explain first? The stolen books, the corpses, or... He looks at his finger. This. I am very surprised to find myself saying this, says Celeborn. But given just how abhorrent everything else is in this room, I do not think I care much about the stolen books. What is the meaning of this room and these corpses? They're my victims, Varix admits. My guards have been secretly taking the bodies of those wretched mountain orcs, and any man foolish or evil enough to align with them for months. For months? Galadriel says in horror as she looks once more at the corpses. Why? Varix smiles sadly. I knew you wouldn't understand. What do you intend to gain from this? Varix speaks hesitantly, as if shameful of his actions, as he simply says... Power. Galadriel glares at him. Do you think that my people have been so free of troubles that we would not need power as well? What matters not is the power that you gain from this, but the evil and cruelty you bring upon yourself. She looks over, especially at the human bodies, and then looks back at Varix as she is about to continue talking, but Varix interrupts her. Your people have troubles, he mocks. You and your kinsmen are from the West, a land without troubles, in a constant state of bliss, drinking the finest wines which seem to sprout forth from the earth, and eating the fat of the land, from orchards the least of which would put the greatest forest in Middle-earth to shame. Galadriel's face hardens as she moves to deny this, but Varix continues. My people have been pushed to the brink of destruction, saved only by my grandsire's willingness to acquire the strength of the earth against them. Without them, we wouldn't have survived. Celeborn shakes his head. But we have saved your people from those troubles. Cannot now be the time when you put away these wicked deeds, now that you have no longer any need of them? Varix laughs at this. You know, for how wise you and your people are, my lord. I'm surprised at just how easily you can be fooled by a stranger's promise. Galadriel's face hardens further. Stop speaking in riddles, Varix. What are you saying? You have little claim to the victory you had over the orcs. It was my power, which my father passed down to me, which destroyed the wall, which allowed you to defeat them, to make your mission successful. He looks directly into Galadriel's eyes, and strangely, we see that for once in her life, she is nearly matched in both resolve and power. The force of his stare startles her, but she refuses to back down. Now that it comes to it, yes, I would like you to explain what you are doing with that ring. It is part of an agreement, I'm afraid. Celeborn raises an eyebrow and waits for Varec to continue. Are you going to explain the agreement? I'm afraid not, though perhaps you will find out one day. The disgust and anger on Galadriel's face are almost immediately replaced with understanding, pity, and fear. Varec, she says softly, please, do not do that. The path you are going down is one which will destroy you or your people, or both. It seems that is going to happen one way or the other, but Anatar has given me a chance, and I am going to take it. Enough of this, Celeborn says. Varec, if you truly mean all this, I will have to imprison you. Imprison a guest? Elvish courtesy truly is fascinating. Is it customary among your people to perform sacrifices in your host's house without his express permission? Varec frowns and finally breaks eye contact with Galadriel and Celeborn before looking back up and saying, Get out, all of you. We are leaving. Celeborn and their guard move to capture him, but Varec draws his sword and brandishes the ring once more. Do you really want to bet on your own natural virtue against a weapon such as this? I promise you, I have the power to collapse the tower in an instant, and I will still come out alive. If you do not let me go, I will not only kill all of you, I will bring such a ruin upon this city that none will ever know it was here. Do you think we would believe you after all that you have said? Says one of the guards, who has likewise drawn his sword. Do you really want to wager it? Stop, Galadriel commands the guard, never having broken eye contact with Varec. Unfortunately, he is not lying, even if he is wrong. Celeborn straightens as his face grows graver, but moves to leave the room. Galadriel follows, and the guard as well soon after. We will not forget this, Galadriel says. I want you out of the city by nightfall. Varec nods. In view of all you have done for me, I shall do as you ask. We then go back to Emin Arnon, where we see Arondir patrolling the walls, likely waiting for another returning scouting party, and with occasional glances at the mountains to the east. Isilmo then comes up to him. My lord, he says, have you seen my son? He appears to have left unannounced. Arondir shakes his head. I'm afraid not, though he may very well have passed me without my knowing it. Your thoughts are likewise plagued with darkness. Indeed. What do you suppose they plan to do with the sword? Arondir shakes his head once more, this time in bewilderment. I simply do not know. They could simply be looking to bring down the fortress. If that was their aim, they could have chosen a far less powerful weapon. He pauses. I have dedicated all of our energies to find— My lord Arondir, my lord Isilmo, yells a voice from off-screen. The camera pans, and we see Yarin come and bow. Arondir is startled by the seemingly drastic tone of the man's voice. What is it? At first, Yarin seems to hesitate, or be considering how exactly to say things, but then, suddenly, he simply bursts out saying, I am a part of a group of 7 spies for the orcs, who were the reason for why the gates opened in the battle, as well as one of the men who let the orcs escape. We were convinced by their elvish overlords that the orcs would soon dominate us one way or the other, and that we ought to serve them and so live. My 6 companions now were ordered to capture a man of noble lineage. My 6 companions and I were ordered to capture a man of noble lineage and bring him back to Mordor. We chose Minister, and my companions are currently leading him through the passage. There are orcs on the other side. They will capture Minister and bring him to Mordor. My lords, I am terribly sorry, especially to you, Lord Isilmo, for your son is now in danger. I will submit myself to whatever judgment you think is worthy of my— He looks up and pauses when he notices that Isilmo and Arondir have already left. Arondir has called together a group of elves and gotten their horses together so that they can sally out and hopefully catch the orcs, while Isilmo has called a few guards alongside Valendiel and has gone back to the citadel to follow the trail. Yarin judges that he will be of most help to Isilmo, and so likewise heads back to the citadel. He arrives a few minutes after them and immediately opens the door to the passage and then goes within it. Meanwhile, the stone hallways at the beginning of the tunnel have given way to the Meanwhile, within the tunnel, the stone hallways have given way to caves as Minister and his companions are slowly reaching the endpoint, creeping their way cautiously. Sir, one of the spies says, I know it is not right to make demands of the men of Westernesse, but could we make greater haste? Minister pauses and turns to the man. Your speech dignifies you. How did you become a man of no higher position than a guard? The spy appears flustered by the question. Well, it is a long story, my lord, one that does not befit the circumstance. Very well. I suppose, yes, we can make greater haste, and they begin to pick up the pace. We see them gradually make their way deeper, and they find the dead body of an orc who has fallen off one of the many cliffs in the tunnel. They continue to make their way until one of the spies points out another indent in the wall. It appears to be the other end, one of Minister's guards says. Indeed, Minister agrees. Unfortunately, I'm not sure how... As he is speaking, we hear the cry of Asilmo calling Minister's name. Minister calls out as well, and the spies stab his guards in the back and open the doorway to the outside. We see about 30 orcs there getting ready to attack. They quickly disarm and grab Minister, while Asilmo, Valandil, and their guards charge into the orcs. They kill some of the spies, with Yarin joining the battle and sorrowfully accepting the death of his former companions. More orcs come to attack as the original set begin to make off with Minister. Valandil, out of everyone, makes the most valiant effort to break through the orcs and chase after Minister, but because of this effort, he fails to dodge an orc swipe towards his head, which ends up slashing through both of his eyes. Unable to fight any longer, he allows Asilmo to get him out of the battle. Arondir and his elves are seen coming around the bend of the mountains. They spot the orcs and charge into them, causing a rout, but by this time, Minister and his orc captors are nowhere to be seen. Elf! Asilmo yells. They took him! They took my son! Please, you must get him back! Arondir is horrified at the news, promises to do so, and immediately leads his elves east. What are you expecting us to do? One of his companions says. Whatever we have to. If we do not get that man back, a calamity the likes of which none of you have ever seen will descend upon this valley. They charge into the wilderness as another group of elves and men, led by Gath and Bronwyn, come to help reinforce. The elves are told the situation, and they quickly chase after Arondir to assist him in his mission, but Bronwyn immediately tends to the wounded Númenóreans, especially Valandil. In our next scene, we are in a forest, and in the early parts of the night. Wolves are howling all about, and the screams of little girls seem to haunt the trees. Then, we see someone's foot swiftly pass the camera. The camera then follows, and we see Glorfindel running with an hitherto unseen swiftness through the forest as the full moon begins to send his silver light through the leaves. This, however, is largely unmatched by the golden glow which seems to rise from within Glorfindel's own body. Wargs occasionally see him, and some are even brave enough to attack, but these are quickly dispatched. He pursues the distant sight of a man dressed in a black cloak upon a horse, standing atop a hill with what appears to be a masked child guarded by orcs. The night continues to wear on as he runs, with the moon orbiting over him as he continues to work his way through the trees, but the hill always seems to be the same distance. Glorfindel, by his expression, appears either not to notice this or to be deliberately ignoring it. Orcs continue to attack, but each time Glorfindel rips off a bit of fur, sometimes easily and sometimes only with a great difficulty. By the time the sun begins to brighten the sky, he appears spent and exhausted. A new pack of wargs gathers around, and we hear Hamul's voice mocking Glorfindel. All that effort just to save a child. One no more powerful than a fledgling pup. The wargs all attack Glorfindel, but he quickly stabs 3 of them while the rest tear and bite to seemingly no effect. Hamul's voice seems confused by this, and Glorfindel looks the distant figure on the hill in the eye. A blazing fire seems to shine behind his own. Suddenly, as if the earth itself were moving, the hill in the distance seems to zoom forward until it's right in front of Glorfindel. The ineffective wargs disappear, as do the orcs. All that is left is Glorfindel, Hamul, and a few of his guards. You could see through me the entire time, Hamul exclaims. Where is the girl? Glorfindel says, calmly but firmly. Or perhaps you wish to see the full extent of the power the Valar have entrusted to me. I can assure you. Further hindering my path will only grant you the sorrowful pleasure of seeing what remainder of the light of the 2 trees, when provoked in wrath, can do to a man of evil. As he says this, the glow about him becomes more visible, despite the light of the sun, and, indeed, seemingly because of the light of the sun. Your illusions last only so long as none are able to open the blinds. He then charges at Hamul, drawing his sword to finally execute the criminal, only to find that when the blade pierces his armor, it does so too quickly and easily. He turns and sees that the image of Hamul has remained static, and the guards likewise remain where they are. Glorfindel closes his eyes and takes a deep breath. We then hear a great crash, like the shattering of glass, and when he opens his eyes, the images of Hamul and his guards have disappeared, though the land around is the same. More interestingly, however, there is no voice from Hamul, who appears to have fled from the scene. A double illusion, Glorfindel mutters to himself. I will not allow that to work on me again. He climbs to the top of the hill and begins searching the surrounding lands. It appears as though almost all the wargs have fled, but he can still sense an evil presence within the forest. More disturbingly, he looks to the east and sees in a vision a great dark cloud engulfing the whole land. He looks back to the west and sees a clear sky and bright light shining from over the mountains. Then, almost as suddenly as it came, the vision disappears, and he is presented with the plain look of the world again, the sun still rising in the east. Glorfindel looks up to the sky, and we see an eagle circling above him, though he does not appear to be looking at it. He nods his head, returns his gaze to the east, and charges back into the forest. We then see Gil-galad and Elrond consulting several elvish counselors who live throughout the realm of Eregion when Galadriel and Celeborn burst in and demand his attention. At first, Gil-galad is annoyed at their abrupt behavior, but as they explain the situation, he very quickly drops everything and attends to them. While they explain what happened with Varc and the other possible effects of Elendil and Eregion, Celebrimbor and Narvi enter into the palace as well, and recount what had happened to them with King Durin. Gil-galad is extremely disturbed by these reports. He takes a moment to consider things before concluding that those rings created under Elendil's guidance are either defective by design or by some flaw in the process. He asks Celebrimbor his opinion on the matter, to which Celebrimbor notes the many times that Elendil had ordered the processes of creating the rings to change from their natural course according to the ordinary rules of smithery to fit some new design. In some cases, this was done for the purpose of experiment with the lesser plain rings. In others, it was done to the great rings. We had reasoned, he states, that someone who had been under the direct tutelage of Ale himself was simply seeing things more clearly than we. But knowing what we do now, Gil-galad stands from his seat. Can the great rings heal the gradual corruption of which I spoke? They can. In fact, I have seen their effects myself, and, indeed, they can even, to a small degree, restore the world to its original virginity, though now they appear to also have a power to destroy. As Galadriel and Celeborn have pointed out, they can be used as weapons to amplify power just as much as they can be used as tools to save the world. Once more, Gil-galad thinks on this. Do you think you can create more rings? Celebrimbor is surprised by this question. What do you mean, High King? Clearly, the rings made under the guidance of this Anatar have a corrupting influence, one which acts far too quickly. They must therefore be locked up and kept away, especially from any mortal hands. We may still, however, attempt to bring good out of the evil counsel of Elendil. New rings made apart from his corrupting influence, Galadriel says as she realizes the thought process. She turns to Gil-galad, and without their ability to hurt? Gil-galad nods before turning back to Celebrimbor. Can it be done? It will be done, High King. Though we have exhausted our sources of fine metals. We shall have to go and gather more. Celebrimbor nods to Narvi as he says this, who nods back, and immediately the two of them leave to begin their work. Gil-galad appears to be frustrated as they leave. What is it, High King? Galadriel asks. This Anatar has created a seemingly endless wave of troubles through which I have had to sort. I know not what sort of creature he is, but although I have made some progress into understanding his motivations, in many ways he seems to have caused trouble at random. In any case, I am done here. Elrond, we are leaving. Yes, High King. Though, if I may request one final thing, I would like to have some time to ready myself and to say my goodbyes. Gil-galad gives his ambassador a knowing smile and nods. Elrond bows respectively and goes off to ready himself for departure. I also have a request for you, High King, Galadriel says. Go on. Despite the work you have done to reconcile the Smiths and myself, I fear that they shall not cooperate with any sort of royal power while we are here. Gil-galad sighs. Yes, I'm afraid that is another point of unraveling I have had to do, and I fear you may be right. The Smiths, it is clear, were so deeply and subtly taught to mistrust you and Celeborn, and to a lesser degree your daughter, that they can only speak of you with the greatest prejudice. What's worse, so cunning were the words that they can hardly recognize their own thoughts on the matter, and so speak of your tyrannies as if they were discussing the weather or the different flavors of wine. It is also clear, Galadriel continues when Gil-galad is finished speaking, that while Elendil did not suitably act as envoy to the elvish kingdoms, these people need an envoy now more than ever, and the true envoy is still nowhere to be found. Therefore, I propose that my family acts as envoy at least to the people of Lornand, that they may be warned and guarded against the destructive words of Elendil. Gil-galad looks surprised at the suggestion and turns away to look towards the east to the Misty Mountains. Celeborn, however, looks disturbed at the suggestion. That would take us either through the pass of Caradhras, or into that dwarvish kingdom. I was hoping to receive safe passage through Moria, yes. That seems to be the best option. Celeborn shakes his head violently. I will not tolerate it. Galadriel steps back in surprise at the vehemence of his statement. My love, be reasonable. I will not allow myself to go through a dwarvish realm, and I fail to see why you would dare to do so. What if they were to kill you and our dear Celebrian? You know what the dwarves are like. Indeed, the dwarves of Khazad-dûm are kind and courteous to all who deal fairly and justly with them. Celeborn, the High King says, I do think you are being most unjust about this. Durin's folk are not the people who laid waste to Doriath, and to attribute to them the sins of their kinsmen would be no different than if you were punished for the crimes of Feanor and his sons. Celeborn wavers for a moment before once more reaffirming his resolution not to go through Moria and storming off into his chambers. Galadriel looks expectantly at the High King, who then says, I think your suggestion is very wise, Galadriel. I will arrange an honor guard of loyal and dedicated guardsmen and servants to help you on your way, as well as envoys of my own to assist you in helping the people of Loranand. In fact, he looks in the direction where Elrond had left. I think news of the dangers of this situation ought to be spread far and wide. And finally, for our last scene, we watch the journey of Arondir and his elvish companions as they make their way up the hillsides of the Ethel Duath, eventually coming to the pass of what would one day be Minas Morgul. They are clearly in a hurry, but harried severely by their lack of resources or planning, mostly making their way by foraging, only to find that they simply cannot track down the orcs. Once they make their way through the pass, they feel the earth begin to shake. Arondir in particular seems concerned by this, but they continue their journey and come to see the whole face of the plain of Gorgoroth. There are few houses and even fewer trees, as massive trenches, holes, and forges are scattered about the land, though strangely no orcs seem to be about. The earth quakes once more as cracks go up in every direction, and as if having a premonition of what is about to happen, Arondir tells everyone to find cover. The cracks once more make their way to the mountain at the center, but this time, instead of a violent eruption which peters out, the mountain sends forth a surge of ash both across the ground and through the air. It continues its eruption as the elves recover and regroup from the main shock, as Arondir looks down upon the Gorgoroth to see the untold number of orcs and men coming out of their shelters as darkness covers the face of the land. This time permanently. Arondir looks at his companions and shakes his head sorrowfully, with tears coming into his eyes. He pauses for a moment, before eventually walking back down the mountains, leading his men back to Emin Arnon. At one point, one of his companions asks what is going on, and he is only able to utter one thing. We lost. And with that, the screen fades to black.